In the morning, when the first rays of the sun touched the earth, they rose and continued their journey. The snow, which had recently covered the land, began to melt, and the air became surprisingly fresh and warm. A light breeze stirred their hair, filling the surrounding nature with the breath of life. Everything around them was waking up from a long winter slumber, and with every step they took, it became clearer that they had left behind the cold, fog, and darkness, and ahead of them lay a new beginning. Chloe and Caleb walked in silence for a while, enjoying the quiet and warmth that came with the dawn. The surrounding world was filled with the sounds of nature, birds singing, leaves rustling, and in the distance, the gurgling of a river, which was their next landmark. Stepping on the soft earth, they moved faster, their hearts beginning to beat in unison with this new rhythm of life. After some time, when they were a little tired, Caleb spoke up decisively, his voice soft but sincere. "You know, Chloe, sometimes I feel like we're intertwined with this world. I don't know, maybe it's just my thoughts, but it feels like every step is not just forward movement, but some kind of lesson. I don't always understand why everything happens, but I feel that everything we go through is not by chance." Chloe turned to him and smiled slightly, as if his words had comforted her. She nodded, and her gaze softened. "Yeah, you're right. Sometimes everything seems like chaos, and it's hard to figure out what to take seriously, and what's just there to confuse us. But maybe, in the end, everything will make sense. We just can't see the whole picture until we reach the end." They walked on in silence, absorbed in their thoughts. But then Caleb, after a short pause, continued, his voice warm as if sharing something very personal. "I haven't always been like this. I didn't have a family, Chloe. When I was little, I was alone. I didn't know what real love was. I was an orphan, and no one was waiting for me. But one rainy night, when I was at my lowest, they found me. It was a family of werewolves." Chloe turned to him in surprise, her eyes full of curiosity and genuine interest. "Werewolves? But how? How did you become a part of them?" she asked, unable to hide her astonishment. Caleb took a deep breath, his eyes becoming thoughtful, as if he were reliving that moment when his life had changed forever. "I remember that evening like it was yesterday. I was wet, frozen, after being kicked out of the shelter. I wandered the streets, not knowing where to go. And then they found me. They were different, but not in a bad way. They were people, but they were like me, lost. My foster parents, the werewolf family, found me when I was sitting under a tree, soaked from the rain, not knowing where to go. They took me in, healed me, and became my parents." Caleb fell silent for a moment, and Chloe listened to his words without interrupting. She could see how the pain he spoke of was still fresh in his heart, though he tried not to show it. "You know, Chloe, when they accepted me, I felt like my life had a purpose. They taught me so much, not just about what it means to be a werewolf, but about how real family isn't defined by blood. They showed me that love and support can come in the most unexpected forms. I never thought I'd end up with them, but they became my family, and that gave me strength." Chloe listened intently, her heart filled with deep respect and sympathy. She didn't know what to say, but her words were sincere. "You're so strong, Caleb. And you're not alone. You're with them, with those who accepted you, who became your family." Caleb felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. He smiled genuinely, and it wasn't just a gesture of gratitude, but an acknowledgement of what really matters in life. "Yeah, you're right. And maybe it's this family that taught me to believe that even in the darkest moments, light can be found. It's strange, but I think everything that happens to us is part of the journey we have to go through to find our place." They both fell silent, enjoying the moment when the warm sun lit their faces and the world around them became brighter and brighter. And although each of them had their own heavy story, their journey was only beginning. And together, step by step, they could face whatever lay ahead. The sun was setting, casting a golden-orange light on the sky when two figures appeared on the trail ahead. Chloe immediately tensed, instinctively grabbing Caleb's hand. He too stopped, squinting at the strangers. As they approached, the figures became clearer. Two men, tall and strong, with piercing eyes like wolves. Their movements were smooth, almost predatory, and there was a wariness in their gazes. "Caleb," one of them said in a low voice, narrowing his eyes slightly. "We've been looking for you." "Leo." "Kevin," Caleb stepped forward, but his voice was tense. "Why are you here?" "We found out you've returned," replied the second man, Kevin, his voice colder and sharper than his brother's. His gaze slid over to Chloe, and distrust immediately flickered in his eyes. "And brought someone." Chloe felt a wave of unease wash over her. The men didn't look hostile, but there was something unsettling in their presence. "This is Chloe," Caleb said firmly, stepping to shield her. "She's with me." Leo, the older of the two brothers, raised an eyebrow, assessing Chloe. "You brought her to our land?" His voice was soft, but there was a hidden threat beneath it. "She's not an enemy," Caleb replied sharply. "She's part of my journey." Kevin snorted, his gaze turning even colder. "Part of your journey? You know we can't trust outsiders, Caleb. It seems you've forgotten our rules." Caleb clenched his fists, his face becoming as hard as stone. "This is not up for discussion. I trust her, and that should be enough." "You're getting too soft, brother," Kevin threw out, taking a step forward. "Maybe she's using you? You don't know her as well as you think." "Enough." Caleb took a step toward Kevin, placing himself between him and Chloe. His eyes glowed amber, and his voice became low and threatening. "She's under my protection, and I won't let anyone, even you, doubt that." Leo raised his hand, gesturing for Kevin to stop. "All right, Caleb," he said in a conciliatory tone. "If you're so sure about her, we won't interfere." He gave Chloe one last look, then turned to Caleb. "We'll be waiting for you at the den. The council is gathering tonight. You know what that means." "I know," Caleb replied curtly. The brothers turned and disappeared into the forest as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only a faint rustling behind. Chloe finally breathed easier, though her heart was still racing. "Who were they?" she asked, looking at Caleb. He ran a hand over his face, clearly exhausted by the encounter. "Leo and Kevin, my half-brothers. They've always been like that. Wary, especially of outsiders." "They hate me," Chloe said quietly, her voice trembling. "No," Caleb replied softly, turning to her. "They just don't trust anyone outside our family. But I won't let them harm you. You're with me, and that's enough." His words calmed her a little, and she nodded. "What's the council they were talking about?" "It's a meeting for our family," Caleb explained. "When something happens that could affect us, we all gather to discuss the next steps. I think they want to talk about why I've returned, and most likely about you." Chloe nervously swallowed, but Caleb reassuringly squeezed her hand. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll handle it. You don't owe them anything." They continued on their way until the forest around them began to thin, the snow completely gone, replaced by soft grass and trees with green leaves. The warmth of the sun enveloped them, and the air already carried the scent of spring. Chloe and Caleb walked side by side, their conversations gradually softening the tension from the encounter with the brothers. Chloe looked at Caleb, who was walking slightly ahead. "You know," she began, trying to distract him from dark thoughts. "You're an amazing person, Caleb. Despite everything that's happened to you, you've stayed so kind." He smiled faintly, but his gaze remained thoughtful. "It's not always like that, Chloe. There were times I wanted to give up, when I thought it would be easier to become like them. Hard, cold. But my family, they showed me that being kind isn't weakness. It's strength. Chloe listened to him, amazed at how much depth and pain this man carried within him. Caleb, she said quietly, thank you for everything. He stopped, looked at her, and his gaze softened. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, Chloe. You're important to me. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and she nodded, unable to speak. Together, they continued their journey, knowing that challenges awaited them ahead, but feeling that together, they could overcome anything. When they started descending into the narrow gorge, the world around them seemed to freeze. The cliffs on both sides rose toward the sky, their sharp edges cutting through the soft light of the day. Tree roots burst from the stones, like ancient beings trying to break free. A raven flock circled above their heads, its cawing echoing in this harsh place. Chloe looked around nervously at the surrounding landscape. Everything here seemed foreign, gloomy, as if the gorge itself was warning them of what was to come. This place strange, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. Caleb smiled slightly, his eyes scanning the path, but there was something warm in his expression. The gorge has always been like this, he said. It's not scary if you know how to understand it. It's like a guard on the way to the den, a place that immediately keeps strangers out. Chloe nodded, but her unease didn't fade. Have you been here often? She asked, trying to distract herself from the gloomy roots that looked like claws. Very often, Caleb replied. His voice became thoughtful, as though memories were coming to life before his eyes. I grew up here. The den is home. Although, at first, it seemed frightening to me. Why? Caleb snorted, as though recalling something amusing. The first time they brought me to the den, I was completely bewildered. A family found me when I was still a child. They found me in the rain, soaked, frozen, and scared. I thought they would eat me, or something like that. What? Chloe asked, looking at him in surprise. Well, I was only 6, he said, laughing. Back then, I didn't know what werewolves were. To me, they were just huge, scary people. But instead of harming me, they took me in. Chloe smiled, her anxiety easing a little. And what happened next? They brought me to the den, Caleb continued. It was dark, cold, with many tunnels and halls. I remember hiding behind one of the columns while Leo and Kevin tried to pull me out. They were still teenagers back then, but they really annoyed me. Chloe laughed, imagining little Caleb, scared but stubborn. One day, I tried to run away, he said, smiling lightly as he remembered that day. But I didn't get far. Our leader stopped me. He was just standing in the way, arms crossed, and said, "Where do you think you're going, little wolf cub?" Little wolf cub? Chloe asked, smirking. That's what he called me. Then he added, if you want to leave, go ahead. But know that family is not something you can run from. Caleb paused for a moment, his expression turning serious. I didn't understand his words back then, but now I understand. Family is more than just blood. It's those who support you even when you fall. Chloe felt these words touch her heart. She thought about her brother, about what her family had been like before, and she felt her eyes welling up with tears. You're happy you found them, aren't you? She asked quietly. Caleb nodded, looking at her. Yes. But now, my family is not just them. He looked at Chloe, and in his gaze, there was something more than just words. Before she could respond, the path abruptly ended, and before them opened the entrance to the den. It was a huge, dark opening in the rock, framed by strange stone formations. The wind howled through this crevice, creating the sensation that the place itself was warning them that strangers were not welcome here. We're here, Caleb exhaled. Chloe stopped, looking at the entrance. Her heart was racing, but next to Caleb, she felt a little more confident. Are you ready? He asked, his voice soft but serious. She nodded, With you, yes. They entered, plunging into the dimness of the den, not knowing what awaited them ahead, but firmly deciding that together, they would overcome everything. When Chloe and Caleb entered the den, they found themselves in a huge hall, the walls of which were carved directly into the rock. The ceiling was so high that its peak was lost in the half-light. On both sides of the hall stood massive wooden tables, carved from whole tree trunks. On each table, candles burned, and there were plates with game, which had clearly been part of a recent feast, meat on bones, roasted rabbits, ducks, and even huge pieces of venison. The air was thick with the smells, roasted meat, fresh herbs, the fire, and something spicy. Runes glimmered on the walls, carved into the stone, and it seemed like they glowed with an inner light, pulsating in sync with some invisible rhythm. By each pillar stood massive cauldrons, with something boiling in them, perhaps soups or herbal brews. In the center of the hall was the main table, where the leader sat. He was a tall man with a thick mane of gray hair and eyes the color of steel. He sat in a massive stone chair, as if a king ruling his kingdom. His gaze was firm and wary. Beside him stood two, Caleb's half-brothers, Leo and Kevin, who had already warned the others of Caleb and Chloe's arrival. When they entered, the conversations at the tables died down. All the werewolves in the hall, more than a dozen, turned toward them. Their gazes were wary, and some were even hostile. Caleb, the leader, said loudly, his voice deep like an echo in a cave. "You've returned." "Yes," Caleb replied, meeting his gaze calmly. "But I'm not alone." He gestured to Chloe, who stood beside him, a little nervous under their piercing gazes. Her eyes darted from one face to another. The eyes of these people, or rather werewolves, seemed too bright, too hard, as if they could see right through her. "We don't accept strangers," one of the werewolves sitting at the table spat. His voice was hoarse, and his gaze was hostile. "Especially humans. She came with me," Caleb said firmly, stepping forward. His voice turned cold, and there was not a hint of doubt in it. Leo, his older half-brother, frowned and crossed his arms. "You know the rules, Caleb. Humans should know where we live. Her presence here is a threat to all of us." "She's not a threat," Caleb answered again, his voice rising. "She's with me, and I guarantee her safety." Chloe felt the tension in the hall rising. She wanted to say something, but Caleb placed his hand on her shoulder, signaling that he would handle this. "Enough," the leader finally said, raising his hand. His voice was so authoritative that everyone fell silent. He looked at Chloe, his gaze piercing, like the cold wind. "Why did you bring her here, Caleb? Do you understand the responsibility you're taking on?" Caleb straightened. "I understand," he said firmly. "She's needed. She's been through a lot, just like me. She's part of my path, and I won't let anyone harm her." The leader stared at him for a long time, as though weighing every word. Then his gaze shifted to Chloe. "And you, girl?" he asked, his voice softer but still threatening. "Why are you here? Why are you with him?" Chloe swallowed, but gathered her strength. "Because I believe in him," she said. Her voice trembled, but it was sincere. "I don't know what awaits us, but I'm ready to go with him to the end." A silence hung in the air. Some of the werewolves seemed displeased with her words, but no one dared to interrupt. "She's a human," someone from the hall spoke again. "We can't trust humans." "Enough," the leader shouted, his voice echoing across the hall. He stood up, and his tall, powerful figure overshadowed everything around him. "Caleb has always been one of us, and if he believes she deserves to be here, I'm willing to give her a chance. But remember, Caleb, if she lets us down, the responsibility falls on you." Caleb nodded, his face remaining calm, but there was a sense of relief in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. The leader sat down again, raising a cup with a dark liquid. Now, sit at the table. The feast is not over yet. Caleb and Chloe walked to one of the tables where a place had already been found for them. The atmosphere remained tense, but thanks to the leader's words, Chloe felt she could breathe a little easier. The food was simple but delicious. Roasted meat, vegetables, bread seasoned with herbs, and a strong drink that warmed her. Chloe noticed that some of the werewolves were still eyeing her with distrust, but no one dared to approach. Caleb quietly whispered to her, "It will be fine. Just don't show that you're scared." She nodded, feeling his support. As they ate, the conversations began to pick up again, and the tension in the hall eased a little. But new challenges awaited them ahead. The feast was coming to an end. The air still carried the smell of roasted meat and herbs, but the hall had grown noticeably quieter. The werewolves seemed to have softened a bit after the long conversation over food and drinks, yet the tension still lingered. Chloe sat next to Caleb, trying to remain unnoticed. She could feel the gazes on her, but she tried to stay composed. The soft light cascaded from the recesses in the walls. Torches and candles flickered there. The light was warm, golden, as though the very air was filled with calm. But its soothing nature did not help Chloe. Her heart was still pounding. Caleb leaned towards her to whisper, "It's okay. They're relaxed for now. Just stick with me, and no one will harm you." She nodded, pretending to be absorbed in the remnants of her dinner. But then two figures appeared beside their table, Leo and Kevin. Both moved silently, their steps like the careful movements of predators approaching their prey. "Caleb," Leo began, leaning closer to him, his voice low but loud enough for Chloe to hear. "We're still not sure you did the right thing by bringing her here." Caleb raised his gaze to his brother. A shadow of irritation appeared in his eyes. "I already explained," he answered calmly but firmly. "She's here because it's her right to be with me. Right?" Kevin, standing a little further, scoffed. "Caleb, you're too confident. We should have decided this together, but you just forced it on everyone." "She's human," Leo added. "And you know what that means. She doesn't understand us, our traditions. Do you really think she can handle it?" Chloe felt the sting of Leo's words, but she stayed silent. She knew this wasn't the time to speak. Caleb stood up, not breaking his gaze from his brother's. "Enough. If you want to say something, say it directly. But I won't let you treat her this way. She's stronger than you think." Kevin and Leo exchanged glances. Their faces were stern, but there was a hint of doubt in their eyes. "We don't want to argue," Kevin finally said, his voice softening a little. "But you'll have to prove that she can be part of this world. The council will begin soon," Leo added. "And if you want her accepted, you'll have to convince not only us, but the others as well." Caleb nodded, not looking away. "I know. And I will do it." The brothers lingered for a moment, seemingly studying his reaction, before moving to another table. Their figures disappeared into the dimness of the hall. Chloe cautiously looked at Caleb. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No problem," he replied, sitting back down. "They're always like this, testing me, but I won't let them touch you." She felt warmth in his words, which somewhat eased her fears. After a few minutes, the hall filled with noise. Werewolves began to move, tables were pushed aside, and a group of the eldest members gathered in the center of the hall. They were dressed in simple yet elegant clothes adorned with ornaments and stones resembling stars. This was the council. Caleb leaned towards Chloe and whispered, "Stick with me. It's only just beginning." The council began to form a circle, taking their places at a massive wooden table covered in intricate carvings and ancient runes. In the center of the table, a small fire burned, its flames seeming to dance in rhythm with the whispers emanating from the depths of the hall. These whispers seemed to come from the walls, creating a mystical atmosphere. The elder, a tall man with silver hair, stood, leaning on a carved staff. His eyes shone with wisdom, and his voice, though not loud, made everyone fall silent. "We are gathered here because Caleb has returned to our circle," he began, his words echoing. "But he is not alone. He has brought a human with him." Chloe felt dozens of gazes fixed on her. Her heart raced, but she tried to remain calm. Caleb sat beside her, his hand almost imperceptibly touching hers, reassuring her that he was there. "Caleb," the elder continued, "you know that bringing a human into our lair goes against tradition. We cannot allow someone who doesn't belong to our kin to know our secrets." Caleb stood up, his face remaining calm, but his voice held firmness. "I know the rules, but I brought her here not out of whim. We are both in danger. Black werewolves are hunting us, those who have broken the laws of the pack." These words caused a wave of whispers among the council members. They exchanged glances, and some even frowned. "Black werewolves?" asked one of the council members, a woman with cold eyes and platinum hair. "If they broke the laws, why are they hunting you?" "Because we know their secret," Caleb answered firmly. "They kill without reason, destroying our world. And we've seen their crimes." The elder nodded thoughtfully, his gaze momentarily resting on Chloe. "And yet, the presence of a human here poses a danger to the entire pack. We cannot hide our existence, but we also cannot allow it to lead to our destruction." "It's not her fault," Caleb intervened. "If anyone is putting the family at risk, it's me. She's just trying to survive." The woman with platinum hair scoffed. "A human in our lair is a threat, Caleb. You can't deny it." The elder raised his hand, calling for silence. "However, there is a prophecy," he said. "It speaks of the time when a human will enter our circle, and when this human will change the fate of our pack." Chloe lifted her gaze, surprised by what she was hearing. "A prophecy?" she whispered, turning to Caleb. "I don't know anything about it," he admitted, his voice sounding just as confused. The elder continued, "It is said that the one who finds their way into our lair, without being a werewolf, must undergo a trial to prove their loyalty to the pack. If the trial is passed, this person will gain more than just trust." "And what is this trial?" Caleb asked, his voice sharpening. The elder looked at him for a long moment. "The trial will be determined by nature itself. But know this, it tests not only the strength of the body, but also the strength of the spirit. If she passes, she may have to become one of us." The hall filled with indignant whispers and exclamations. Many of the werewolves were clearly displeased. "Initiation into werewolves? That's impossible." Someone in the crowd shouted. "She's not one of us. A human cannot be a werewolf." Another voice added. The elder struck his staff on the stone floor, silencing everyone. "The decision will be made after the trial," he said firmly. "While she is here, we are obligated to protect her." Caleb clenched his fists, trying not to show his anxiety. He knew that more was at stake than he had realized. Chloe lowered her head, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The elder looked around the hall. "The council is adjourned. Tomorrow, preparations will begin. For now, go and rest. You will need strength." With these words, he left the hall, and the others followed. Chloe and Caleb remained at the table, sensing that their journey had just become even more complicated. The night wrapped the valley in the soft silver light of the full moon. The warm, calm wind barely brushed their faces, lifting stray strands of hair from Chloe and Caleb. They sat on the edge of a high cliff, below which stretched the valley. The land seemed to glow under the moonlight, pale stones, thin winding rivers, tree roots that looked like long shadows from afar. The silence was absolute, only occasionally disturbed by the rustle of wind in the grass and the distant cry of a night bird. Chloe hugged her knees with her arms, looking down at the valley. Caleb sat next to her, resting his chin on his hand, gazing thoughtfully into the distance. "Do you think they're right?" Chloe spoke softly, her voice seeming gentler than usual. She was still processing the events that had occurred a few hours ago. All these talks about prophecies, trials, initiation. Caleb furrowed his brow, lowering his gaze. He was silent for a long time, as though searching for words to explain everything that he himself didn't fully understand. "The council never speaks without reason," he finally said, his voice sounding deep but confident. "If the elders mention the prophecy, it's not just a story to scare us. They know something important." Chloe looked at him, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "So, I have to go through it? The trial initiation? What if I can't do it?" Caleb turned his head to her, his face suddenly serious and focused. "You'll make it, Chloe," he said, looking her straight in the eye. "You're stronger than you think. I know you're scared, but that doesn't mean you can't get through this." She lowered her head, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. "I just don't understand why I'm here. All this stuff with the black werewolves, the pack, the prophecy, it's too much. It feels like I'm complicating everything." Caleb chuckled softly, but there was more warmth than amusement in his laugh. "You're not complicating things, Chloe. You just found yourself at the center of all this. You know, sometimes fate throws us trials not because we want them, but because we are the ones who can handle them." She sighed, leaning on her arms, and looked up at the moon. "Easy for you to say. You know this world, you grew up here. You understand them and their rules. And me? I'm just a human who accidentally ended up in your world. I was an outsider in their world, just like you are now. I was scared too. I didn't know how to live among them, how to be part of their life. But I made it. They taught me that family is not just about blood. It's a choice." Chloe looked at him for a long time, feeling how his words touched her heart. Do you think they'll accept me?" Caleb slowly nodded. "If I could become part of their world, you can too. But it will take time. You'll have to be ready for not everyone to accept you." She nodded quietly, turning her gaze back to the valley. "Thank you, Caleb," she finally said. "Thank you for being with me." Caleb smiled, his gaze softening. "I couldn't have done otherwise. We're in this together." The moonlight illuminated their figures, and the wind gently stirred the grass at their feet. The night seemed endlessly long, but in this silence, Chloe and Caleb found a small reprieve to share their fears and hopes. And in that moment, they realized they were ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. They silently returned to their room, where the lamp barely flickered, casting a soft, dim light across the small space. Caleb looked agitated, his steps restless, and his breathing slightly deeper than usual. He paced the room as if gathering his thoughts, then stopped at the window through which the valley below was still visible under the silver glow of the moon. Chloe moved closer, her gaze full of softness and understanding. She touched his hand, making Caleb turn toward her. "You're worrying too much," she whispered softly, her voice almost a murmur. "Everything will be fine." Caleb looked at her, his eyes as dark and deep as the night outside, filled with emotions, concern, tenderness, and a warm yet still hidden feeling. "I just want you to know," he began, running his hand along her cheek, "that even though something unknown lies ahead of us, I will always be by your side." Chloe smiled faintly, her heart fluttering at his words. "I know, Caleb," she replied, pressing herself against his chest. "I can feel it." He leaned in closer, their faces nearly at the same level. His warm breath brushed against her skin, and she felt everything inside her shift. The next moment, he kissed her, gently, cautiously, as if afraid to disturb this moment. Chloe responded to his kiss, her hands wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. Caleb tenderly ran his hand along her back, as if trying to memorize every movement, every breath of hers. When their lips parted, they stood there for a long moment, gazing into each other's eyes as though afraid to break the fragile magic of the moment. You mean more to me than you think, he said quietly, his voice sincere and warm. She smiled, her eyes shining in the dim light. And you mean the same to me, Caleb, she replied. He gently sat her on the bed, then lay beside her, pulling her into his arms. They embraced, their bodies entwined in a warm and protective cocoon. Chloe rested against his chest, feeling his heart beat steadily and soothingly. You know, he said, stroking her hair, sometimes I think this prophecy is just part of something bigger. Maybe this trial isn't only for you, but for me as well. Why do you think that? She asked softly, her voice sleepy yet intrigued. Caleb paused, staring at the ceiling. Because meeting you made me realize that I need to change. I need to stop living only for the pack. You showed me that there's more to life. Chloe, touched by his words, lifted her head and looked him in the eyes. You've changed my life too, Caleb. And honestly, I'm glad you're here. He smiled, his lips brushing her forehead again as he whispered, then let's go through this together. The quiet wind outside, the full moonlight, and the warmth of their embrace made that night special. For the first time in a long while, both felt that they weren't alone in this complicated, dangerous world. Together, they could face anything. Morning came, and a light fog enveloped the ravine where the pack's lair lay. The sun's rays barely pierced through the branches of the trees, casting a soft light on the stone walls. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Chloe and Caleb left their room together, and she noticed how he nervously rubbed his hands, trying to calm his anxiety. You don't have to worry so much, she said quietly, trying to sound confident, though her own heart was racing. Caleb shook his head. I can't help it. They'll be watching for every mistake you make, especially Kevin and Leo. Chloe squeezed his hand. I'll manage. Not for them, but for us. They made their way to the central hall, where the elders, pack members, and Caleb's brothers, Kevin and Leo, had gathered. The two brothers stood aside, their figures appearing threateningly statuesque in the dim light. Kevin, with his piercing gaze and short hair, looked like a predator ready to strike. Leo, with a calmer expression, still didn't hide his displeasure. Are you sure she can handle it? Kevin asked with a smirk, stepping closer. I trust her more than I trust both of you, Caleb replied calmly, though his voice quivered. Leo crossed his arms. We're here to protect the pack, not play heroes. If she fails, it will be on your conscience. Chloe couldn't hold back and stepped forward. If I fail, it will only be my responsibility. But you still haven't seen what I'm capable of. Her words made the brothers exchange surprised glances, but they didn't respond, stepping back. The elders rose from their seats. The lead alpha, Torin, stepped forward, his silver hair and deep voice commanding respect. Today, Chloe will face a trial of spirit and will. She must prove that she deserves to be among us. This trial will show if she can handle the hardships ahead. Torin pointed to the far exit of the hall, leading to a narrow path between the rocks. Beyond these walls lies a path that will test you. You must walk it alone. No one will help you. It will be a battle with your fears, your weaknesses. Chloe took a deep breath, nodded, and headed for the exit. Her heart was pounding, but she tried to remain confident. Caleb watched her go, struggling to suppress the urge to follow her. As Chloe entered the passage between the rocks, the world around her changed. At first, it was a narrow corridor, but soon it expanded into a strange, foreign landscape. The sun disappeared, and the sky was covered in heavy gray clouds. Twisted trees with roots like claws grew from the ground. The path was difficult. Her feet sank into the mud, and the air felt thick and suffocating. Suddenly, images from the past appeared before her. Her brother, burned in the fire, the house that had turned to ash. You were never strong enough to save me, a voice echoed in her head. That's not true, she whispered, but the voice continued. You failed me. You'll fail them too. No, Chloe cried, clenching her fists. She stepped forward despite the weight in her chest. Shadows surrounded her, resembling black werewolves. They hissed as they neared, but she didn't retreat. I'm stronger than you, she said, lifting her head. The shadows disappeared, and before her stood the final barrier, a bridge over a deep chasm. It was rickety, with rotting planks. Chloe took the first step, and the board beneath her foot cracked. She barely caught herself, curling into a ball. You can do this, she whispered to herself. Struggling across the bridge, she finally made it to the other side. When she emerged from the passage back into the hall, her face was smeared with mud, her hair tangled, but her eyes burned with determination. The hall fell silent. Chloe approached the elders and stopped in front of them. Torin looked at her carefully, then raised his hand. She has passed the trial. Her spirit is pure, and her will is strong. She has proven that she is worthy. Caleb rushed to her, embracing her so tightly that it was hard for her to breathe. I knew you could do it, he whispered, and in his voice was so much pride that her eyes filled with tears. Kevin and Leo stood aside, their faces stern. This is just the first step, Kevin said quietly. But Chloe no longer paid attention to them. She knew she had done the impossible, and this was her moment of victory. When the silence in the hall finally settled and all eyes turned to the elders, Torin, the lead alpha, rose again. He looked at Chloe with such respect that even Kevin and Leo, who had been standing with alert expressions, slightly relaxed their stance. Chloe, you have passed the trial. You have proven that you possess the spirit and resilience we value in our ranks, Torin said. His voice was deep and confident. But your journey is not yet complete. The next step is the initiation into the werewolves. Caleb, standing next to Chloe, flinched slightly. He knew this trial would not be easy. There had only been whispers of prophecies and rumors that it involved something more than just a ritual. What is this initiation? Chloe asked, not hiding her anxiety. Torin looked at her as if pondering whether to go into details right away. The initiation into werewolves is a crossing through gates that connect us to the power that comes from our ancestors. It is a process of purification, awakening the power you carry within yourself but have not fully realized yet. It will be a journey of not only physical but also emotional trials where you will face yourself, the parts of your personality that you have tried to suppress. And when will it happen? Caleb asked, his voice anxious. On the full moon, Torin replied, his gaze serious. In 3 days, we will perform the ritual that will give you a full understanding of your purpose and power. But no, this is not just a test of the body, it is a test of your soul. You must be ready to accept your essence, even if it is difficult and hard to comprehend. Chloe remained silent, processing what had been said. She could feel her inner world beginning to change, but she couldn't yet grasp the full scope of what lay ahead. I'm ready, she finally said, and her voice sounded determined, though she still felt a slight fear within. I'm ready to walk this path. The elders nodded, and a quiet murmur spread through the hall, as if all breaths had become calmer at once. Good, Torin said. Then we will prepare everything needed for the ritual. You are not alone, Chloe. You are part of our family. And no matter how hard it is, we will be with you. Caleb placed his hand on her shoulder, his support palpable. We are together, he said softly. You are not alone. Chloe met his gaze, and although a path full of unknown trials awaited her, she felt that with him, with Caleb, she could face anything. When Caleb and Chloe stepped into the fresh air of the inner courtyard, their gazes met, and both felt the tension that had built up over the past few days ease slightly. The green grass stretched around them, and a gentle breeze stirred their hair. In the distance, the edges of the forest could be seen, still holding onto the icy remnants of winter, but spring was already making its way into the courtyard. That was a lot, Chloe said, sitting down on a stone bench, her hands still trembling from what she'd just gone through. I thought I would be able to handle the trials calmly, but it turned out to be much harder than I expected. Caleb sat beside her, glancing at her face. He knew how hard it had been for her. He himself had gone through his own trials and knew that nothing could be predicted in such situations. You did it, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm proud of you. You showed you have the strength to make it through. And you did, despite all the fears. Chloe nodded, but there was something anxious in her eyes. She couldn't fully believe that the trials were over. So much was still in question, so much uncertainty. It was all part of their journey, and she couldn't yet understand where it would lead. But her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps, and when they looked up, Caleb's brothers, Kevin and Leo, appeared before them. They approached with serious expressions, their gazes wary as always. We see the elders have made their decision, Kevin said, his voice cold but not ominous. You've passed the trials, Chloe. Congratulations. But this is not the end. Now comes the initiation, Leo added, nodding solemnly. We all understand it won't be easy. You must be ready for this night to change you. Caleb felt the tension in the air rise again. His brothers, though still family, hadn't fully accepted Chloe yet. They were cautious with her, though not openly hostile. We know, Caleb replied, looking at his brothers. Chloe and I are ready. We understand what's ahead. Kevin and Leo exchanged glances, and Kevin quietly said, I hope this won't be a mistake. You know that for us, strength and endurance matter. And the fact that Chloe is not just an outsider, but a person with such unusual abilities, sometimes raises doubts. Caleb squeezed Chloe's hand tighter, feeling her heart race. He knew it wasn't easy for his brothers to accept her, but to him it was clear. I'm sure she'll make it, Caleb said. We'll be together, and I'll be by her side. That's the only thing that matters. The brothers seemed to pause for a moment then, as if reaching an internal consensus, they nodded. All right, we'll be waiting for you at the den. The time for the ritual is approaching. And you, Chloe, will go through this just as we all did. Accept this trial, and you'll become part of our pack. Chloe felt the tension in her body ease a little as her brothers took her words seriously, though not without doubt. She took a deep breath and said, I will accept this trial, and I'll be ready for what's to come. I can't refuse. I'm here because this is my path, and I'm ready to walk it. With these words, the brothers stepped back, exchanging a few more glances before heading towards the forest. Caleb and Chloe remained standing, holding onto each other, ready to face the night that would change so much. We're together, Caleb said, and Chloe smiled, despite all the anxiety. Together, we'll get through this. With every step, they felt their bond grow, and how difficult, yet certain, it was to move toward their fate. 3 days had passed since Chloe and Caleb completed their trials. During this time, they prepared for what would happen that night. Inside her, a feeling of uncertainty and fear grew, but there was also something else, resilience and a desire to be a part of this world, a part of Caleb's pack. The night, which had seemed distant, was now upon them, and with it came the initiation that would change her forever. When they entered the large hall, where the elders and the entire family had gathered, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and tension. A full circle of werewolves, their eyes glowing in the dim light of the torches, eagerly awaited the start. The air was filled not only with heavy silence but also with a rhythm, faint but familiar, the drums. The rhythm of the drums quickened, growing louder, like the heartbeat of the earth itself, as if everything around them was preparing for something great and terrifying. Each member of the pack's gaze was fixed on Chloe, And though they were part of the same family, many of them didn't hide their doubts. But this was the moment when there could be no turning back. In the center stood a cup filled with a dark liquid that emitted a heavy odor. The elders were silent, and one of them, with a beard down to his waist, stepped forward and handed the cup to Chloe. He spoke quietly. "Drink if you want to be with us, if you want to become one of us." Chloe stood still, her heart pounding in her chest, but she could not refuse. She took the cup and, without taking her eyes off Caleb, took the first sip. The liquid tasted dreadful, thick and harsh, with bitterness, as though she were swallowing a mixture of bitter herbs, dirt, and metal. Each sip reverberated through her body as if she were drinking dissolved rusty nails. The strength of the drink was so powerful that Chloe felt her vision blur and her body filled with heat. She tried to keep herself conscious, but her head spun, and everything around her seemed to slip away. When the cup was taken from her hands, the world began to spin, her body started to tremble, and her pulse quickened. Inside her, something burst like a bubble, and she felt her own body begin to change. She fell to her knees, her scream cutting through the night. Her face and hands began to shift, her fingers turning into claws, and her muscles ached with pain. She felt her body breaking and taking on a new shape, experiencing every moment of this transformation. Caleb, standing nearby, could no longer stay on the sidelines. He rushed toward her, but Kevin stopped him. He placed a hand on his shoulder, holding him back. "Don't approach," he said firmly. "She must go through this on her own." Caleb froze, unable to look away. He saw Chloe suffer, saw her body taking a new form, and his heart clenched with pain and fear. But there was nothing he could do. All that remained was to watch her go through this. Chloe continued to scream, her body twisting, but after some time, her scream died down. She stood again. In a moment, she was on her feet. Her eyes now burned with a golden light, full of strength and confidence. She felt different, changed, as if a new person had awakened within her. Or a beast. This sensation was strange, yet filled with power. The elders silently approached her. One of them, with deep wrinkles on his face, looked at her, then said, "You've passed. Now you are with us." Caleb, standing outside, watched her. She was transformed, and now her strength could be felt in every movement, in every glance. She was no longer the same Chloe. She had become part of this pack, part of the family. When their eyes met, Caleb felt her gaze filled with new strength and determination. He was proud of her, despite the pain she had endured, and he was sure that together, they could overcome anything. The transformation was complete, but Chloe knew this was only the beginning of their journey. Now that she had become one of them, everything had changed. At the moment when the transformation was complete and Chloe finally became part of the pack, a festive atmosphere filled the hall. The powerful drums beat again, but now was not the rhythm of the trial, but the rhythm of celebration. Huge bonfires lit up the yard, illuminating the faces of those who had come to mark this important night. Laughter and shouts of joy echoed across the grounds, and the air was thick with the sense of roasted meat, game, and fragrant herbs. The members of the pack began to gather around, congratulating one another and treating everyone who was with them. Chloe, despite her exhaustion from the ordeal, felt an incredible lightness and strength within herself. She stood beside Caleb, and every glance they exchanged was full of gratitude and love. But at the same time, she felt her place here, in this new world, becoming indisputable. At some point, amid the general joy, Kevin and Leo, Caleb's brothers, approached them. Their faces were slightly tense, but there was no malice or hostility in their eyes. On the contrary, they looked at Chloe with respect. Kevin, the first of the brothers, opened his mouth to speak, but Caleb raised his hand, stopping him. "No need for apologies," he said firmly, but with warmth in his voice. "You spoke the truth. And I understand that for you, it was important to protect your pack. But now that Chloe has gone through the initiation, she's part of our family, just like all of us. This is her place, and this is my choice." Kevin and Leo exchanged glances, but silently nodded. They approached Chloe and, as a sign of acknowledgement that she had truly become one of them, extended their hands to her. It was a gesture of acceptance, and Chloe accepted it, even though not long ago, she had been an outsider to this world. Now, she understood that she had a place here, that her journey was just beginning. "You've proven you deserve to be with us," Leo said, smiling slightly. "Welcome to the family." Chloe felt her heart fill with warmth from these words. She looked at Caleb's brothers, and despite everything that had been said and done before, now everything seemed simple. They were all part of something bigger than their fears and doubts. "Thank you," Chloe said quietly. "I'm happy to be with you." Caleb placed his hand on her shoulder, and in that moment, they both understood. The trials had been tough, but they had gone through them together, and now nothing could separate them. The evening continued. The feast was in full swing. Laughter and songs filled the air, and people danced around the bonfires, enjoying the moment. All of it was part of their new life, the new reality that was just beginning to unfold before them. And for Chloe, who had once been an ordinary girl, this moment became a symbol of how everything changes if you're ready to go through the trials. And now, among her new brothers and sisters, she felt she belonged to this world. The celebration lasted late into the night, and Chloe, though exhausted, couldn't help but smile at the joy surrounding her. Caleb stayed by her side the entire time, as if afraid it might all vanish. Together, they watched as the pack members danced, sang, and shared stories. Caleb leaned closer to Chloe and whispered, "How are you feeling?" She turned to him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I feel powerful. It's strange, Caleb. Everything around me feels so new, like I'm seeing the world differently." He smiled, his gaze brimming with pride. "That's how it should be. You're part of our pack now. This world is your world." As the evening began to fade and some pack members started to leave, Leo approached them again, holding 2 bowls of a steaming drink. "I think you'll need this," he said, handing them the bowls. "It'll help restore your strength." Chloe gratefully accepted hers, while Caleb eyed his brother carefully. "You're not against her being here anymore?" he asked with a teasing note. Leo shrugged with a smirk. "Well, if she managed to get through that initiation, I think she can handle a lot. She might even be better than all of us," he added with a playful grin. Caleb chuckled softly, the sound warm and free of tension. "We're all in this together, Leo. Now we have one more person to protect us, just as we protect each other." Leo nodded, his expression turning serious. "You're right. Chloe, welcome to the family." With those words, he left, leaving them alone. "He'll show his softer side eventually," Caleb said quietly, wrapping an arm around Chloe. "He just needs time." They sat together by the fire, watching as the remnants of the celebration faded away. The night was quiet, with only a gentle breeze carrying the whispers of the forest. The full moon bathed the valley in light, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "I never thought this would become my life," Chloe finally said, gazing thoughtfully into the fire. "But I feel like I belong here." Caleb looked at her with love and pride. "You're stronger than you realize. This was your place all along. You just didn't know it." They sat in silence for a while, savoring the moment. Ahead of them lay a new life, new challenges, and new victories. But for now, they were together, and that was all that mattered. At dawn, the forest was filled with freshness, and the air carried the scent of pine. Chloe and Caleb woke early, just as the sun began to break through the dense foliage. Leo and Kevin were already waiting for them in the yard, dressed in warm hunting gear. "We're going hunting today," Leo said with a grin. "We want you, Chloe, to feel like a true member of the pack." Chloe didn't hesitate. Her heart raced with anticipation. "I'm ready," she replied confidently, glancing at Caleb. He nodded, smiling faintly, knowing she was becoming more and more a part of their world. They ventured deep into the forest, stepping into the shadow of towering trees. The forest felt alive, every crack of a branch underfoot, every rustle of leaves brimming with nature's energy. Caleb walked beside Chloe, occasionally glancing at her to make sure she was doing well. "You okay?" he whispered as they moved through thick underbrush. "Completely," she replied, her voice filled with excitement. When they reached a wide clearing, Leo raised a hand, signaling everyone to stop. "This is where we'll start," he said, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. Chloe tried to follow their every move. The brothers moved gracefully, blending into the shadows, while Caleb stayed close, teaching her gestures and signs. At one point, Leo pointed ahead. On the far side of the clearing, a herd of deer grazed. "Chloe, this is your moment," Caleb said quietly, nudging her forward. "Show us what you've learned." She felt her blood surge with excitement, but her newly awakened animal instincts, sharpened by the initiation, began to take over. Chloe crouched and moved almost silently, inching closer to the herd. Her movements were quick and precise. The brothers watched from a distance. "She's doing well," Kevin whispered, impressed by her agility. "Almost too well," Leo added, narrowing his eyes. "Caleb, you didn't coach her, did you?" "It's all her," Caleb said proudly, watching as Chloe closed in on her target. Suddenly, one of the deer lifted its head, sensing her presence. But Chloe didn't falter. With incredible speed, she sprang forward, closing the distance in seconds. Her leap was so swift that even the brothers, accustomed to the speed of werewolves, exchanged surprised glances. Chloe managed to get close enough to block the animal's escape and quickly secured the prey. Her strength and precision were astonishing. When she returned with the deer, Leo and Kevin were stunned. "Well, Chloe," Leo said, approaching her with a disbelieving smile. "I didn't expect that. It's like you've been hunting with us for years." Kevin shook his head, smirking. Even Caleb didn't show such skill back in the day. Caleb just laughed, gazing at Chloe with pride. "I told you she's capable of amazing things." Chloe, slightly out of breath but satisfied, wiped the sweat from her brow. "I've just been watching you closely," she replied with a smile. The brothers exchanged glances and nodded simultaneously. "You've proven you can be more than just part of the pack," Leo said. "You can be a leader." Those words filled Chloe with warmth. She looked at Caleb, who whispered softly, "I'm proud of you." Together, they returned to the den with their catch, feeling they had taken another step toward truly becoming one with the pack. At dawn, the forest filled with freshness, and the air was saturated with the scent of pine trees. Chloe and Caleb woke up early, just as the sun began piercing through the thick foliage. Leo and Kevin were already waiting in the yard, dressed warmly in their hunting gear. "Today, we'll be hunting," Leo said with a smile. "We want you, Chloe, to feel like a true member of the pack." Chloe didn't hesitate. Her heart raced with anticipation. "I'm ready," she replied confidently, glancing at Caleb. He simply nodded, looking at her with a slight smile, understanding how Chloe was becoming more integrated into their life. They ventured deep into the forest, moving further into the shadows of the massive trees. The woods felt alive. Every crack of a branch underfoot, every rustle of leaves carried the energy of nature. Caleb walked beside Chloe, occasionally glancing at her as if checking how she was holding up. "Are you okay?" he whispered as they pushed through thick bushes. "Completely," she responded, her voice full of enthusiasm. When they reached a wide clearing, Leo raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. "We'll start here," he said, listening closely to the forest sounds. Chloe tried to follow their every move. The brothers moved with ease, almost blending into the shadows, while Caleb stayed close to her, teaching her with gestures and signals. At one point, Leo pointed ahead. At the far end of the clearing, a herd of deer grazed peacefully. "Chloe, this is your moment," Caleb whispered, nudging her forward. "Show us what you've learned." She felt her blood boil with excitement, but her newfound animal instincts, awakened after her initiation, began to take over. Chloe crouched low and, moving almost silently, crept closer to the herd. Her movements were quick and precise. The brothers watched from a distance. "She's doing well," Kevin whispered, impressed by her agility. "Almost too well," Leo added, narrowing his eyes slightly. "Caleb, are you sure you didn't coach her?" "This is all her," Caleb said proudly, watching Chloe close in on her target. Suddenly, one of the deer raised its head, noticing her movement, but Chloe didn't falter. With incredible speed, she darted forward, covering the distance in mere seconds. Her sprint was so swift that even the brothers, accustomed to the speed of werewolves, exchanged surprised looks. Chloe managed to get close enough to block the deer's path and quickly seized her prey. Her strength and precision were astonishing. When she returned with the deer, Leo and Kevin were stunned. "Well, Chloe," Leo said, approaching her with a skeptical smile. "I didn't expect that. It's like you've been hunting with us for years." Kevin shook his head, chuckling. Even Caleb wasn't this quick back in the day. Caleb just laughed, looking at Chloe with pride. "I told you she was capable of much more than you thought." Slightly out of breath but satisfied, Chloe wiped the sweat from her forehead. "I was just paying close attention to you," she replied with a smile. The brothers exchanged glances and nodded in unison. "You've proven you can be more than just part of the pack," Leo said. "You could be a leader." Those words filled Chloe with warmth. She glanced at Caleb, who softly whispered, "I'm proud of you." Together, they returned to the den with their catch, feeling as though they'd taken another step toward becoming one with the pack. The celebration in the den was in full swing. Another feast was prepared quickly. Roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and bowls filled with steaming herbal broth. The air was thick with the aroma of food, laughter, conversation, and the crackle of torches lining the walls. Chloe sat next to Caleb, feeling more confident than ever. She watched the pack members gradually accepting her into their circle. Some came over to talk or simply to show their respect. The alpha stood at the center of the hall on a raised platform from where he could see everyone. His booming voice occasionally rose above the noise as he shouted jokes or raised toasts to celebrate the pack's newest member. "Chloe," he called out suddenly, drawing her attention. She lifted her head, and once again, dozens of eyes turned toward her. "You've passed the trials and proven your strength. Now you're one of us, but tell us, how do you feel?" His voice was firm yet kind. Chloe hesitated for a moment before standing up. "I feel like I've found my place," she began, looking around at the gathered crowd. "It wasn't easy, and I know it wasn't easy for some of you to accept me. But now I understand that being part of your family is an honor, and I'll do everything I can to live up to your trust." Her words were met with approving murmurs. Several werewolves at the tables raised their mugs, and someone even pounded a fist on the table in support. "Well said," the alpha nodded. "This is only the beginning of your journey." Caleb smiled as he watched Chloe. He saw how much she had changed over the past few days, growing stronger, more self-assured. After her speech, Chloe sat back down, and Caleb's brothers approached her. Leo and Kevin looked more at ease than usual. "You surprised us," Kevin admitted, extending his hand to her. "Sorry if we were too harsh at first, but you've proven us wrong. Now we know you're not just some random guest," Leo added with a grin. "You're one of us." Chloe shook Kevin's hand, feeling a warm sense of belonging swell in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "Your words mean a lot to me." Caleb observed the exchange from a short distance, not interfering but clearly proud. When his brother stepped away, he leaned closer to Chloe and said quietly, "I knew you could win them over." She smiled back at him. The celebration lasted deep into the night. The torches gradually burned out, and the werewolves began to disperse. Caleb and Chloe stepped out into the den's courtyard. A full moon hung over the valley, bathing everything in a soft silver glow. The night was quiet, broken only by the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees and rocks. "I still can't believe this is all real," Chloe said softly, gazing at the moon. "You've earned it," Caleb replied, standing beside her. "I'm proud of you, Chloe." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, gently touching his hand. Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with tenderness. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered. "And this is just the beginning." They stood like that for a while, savoring the moment of peace and silence. Somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed, a reminder that the night belonged to the pack. Chloe felt that she had not only found a new place, but also a new family. And now, with Caleb by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. When the feast in Chloe's honor ended, and the sounds of laughter and conversation faded away, Chloe and Caleb returned to their room. The soft moonlight streamed through a narrow window, illuminating the rustic wooden furniture and fur-covered bed. The room felt quiet and peaceful after the lively evening. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off her boots and feeling the exhaustion settle into her body. Caleb approached her from behind, his warm hands gently resting on her shoulders, massaging them. "You did it, Chloe," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you." She looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Caleb. I couldn't have done it without you." Caleb sat beside her, taking her hand and pulling her slightly closer. Their eyes met, and he brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered. Leaning closer, their lips met in a tender kiss. His arms wrapped around her, drawing her nearer, while her fingers brushed against his chest, feeling the warmth of his touch. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in serene silence. But suddenly, a strange sound interrupted their moment. It started as a faint rustling outside the door, like something or someone accidentally brushing against the stone walls. Chloe pulled back, her senses on high alert. "Did you hear that?" Caleb asked, standing swiftly. His posture stiffened, every muscle taut like a predator ready to strike. Chloe nodded, her heart beating faster. Could it be the wind? She asked hesitantly, though doubt laced her voice. Caleb was already at the door, opening it just enough to peer into the hallway. He scanned the dim corridor, his sharp eyes picking out every shadow. "Stay here," he instructed quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No, I'm coming with you," Chloe insisted, standing up. But Caleb shook his head firmly. "Please, Chloe. It could be dangerous." Reluctantly, she nodded, watching as he slipped out of the room. His footsteps were nearly silent as he moved down the stone corridor. The air was heavy with stillness, but his instinct screamed that something was off. Then he heard it, a faint crack from the main hall below. He quickened his pace, descending the stairs. Near the entrance, A shadow flitted across the wall. It wasn't one of the pack. The movements were foreign and deliberate, brimming with caution. With a fierce growl, Caleb launched forward, tackling the figure. It was a black werewolf, an outsider, a scout. His eyes glinted dangerously in the dim light as he twisted out of Caleb's grasp, narrowly avoiding the first blow.
"Who are you? What do you want?"
Caleb snarled, pinning the scout against the wall. The intruder didn't answer. His movements were sharp and calculated, and he struck Caleb in the side, forcing him to stumble back. Caleb recovered quickly, retaliating with a powerful punch that sent the scout reeling. Their fight was brutal and unrelenting. The sounds of their clash echoed through the den, snarls, the crunch of fists meeting flesh, the cracking of wood and stone. Caleb quickly realized the scout wasn't ordinary. His agility and strength were far above average. At one point, Caleb managed to pin the intruder to the ground. But the scout used a clever trick to escape, leaving a set of deep claw marks across Caleb's shoulder before darting toward the exit.
"Chloe,
get help!" Caleb shouted, realizing he couldn't hold the scout much longer. The intruder, sensing time slipping away, bolted for the forest. Caleb chased him, but the scout was too fast. Within moments, his dark figure vanished into the trees, leaving Caleb standing at the den's entrance, his chest heaving with frustration and worry. When he returned to the room, Chloe was already at the door, her face pale with fear. "Are you okay?" she asked, rushing to him. "I'm fine," Caleb said, though his voice was taut with anger. It was a black werewolf. A scout. "They're watching us, Chloe." Her eyes widened, her fear evident. "What do we do now?" "We tell the Alpha," Caleb said, taking her hand firmly. "We need to prepare. And now they know where you are." His words hung in the air like a warning. Both of them understood that the danger was closer than ever and that everything had just changed. Together, Caleb and Chloe hurried to the Alpha, their unease growing with each step. By the time they reached the main hall, the den was already stirring with activity. Pack elders and warriors were gathering, their murmurs echoing off the stone walls. The Alpha stood in the center, his towering figure illuminated by the flickering torchlight. His piercing gaze locked onto Caleb as the room fell silent. "Caleb, what happened?" the Alpha asked, his voice like a low rumble of thunder. Caleb, blood dripping from his wounded shoulder, stepped forward. He ignored the pain, his focus unshaken. Chloe stood close beside him, clutching his hand. "It was a scout," Caleb said, his tone steady despite the tension. "A black werewolf breached the den. We fought, but he escaped." The Alpha's brows furrowed, his expression darkening. His gaze shifted to Chloe, then back to Caleb. "Are you certain it was a scout? Such a breach is no coincidence. Why are they hunting you?" Caleb clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "They've been after us since we left the city," he admitted. "The black werewolves broke the code. They're hunting Chloe because she witnessed their crimes, and I've been protecting her ever since." "What crimes?" the Alpha demanded, his tone heavy with suspicion. Caleb hesitated, glancing at Chloe. Her hand tightened in his, and he drew strength from her presence. "They murdered her brother," he finally said. "Years ago, we crossed paths with them while they were hunting innocents. Her brother tried to shield her, but they killed him and burned their home." Chloe saw their faces, and now they want to silence her. A heavy silence fell over the hall. The crackling of torches was the only sound as the pack absorbed Caleb's words. The Alpha's expression hardened. "They've violated our sacred laws," the Alpha said gravely. "The black werewolves are a menace, and their thirst for power destroys everything in their path." Chloe shivered, the memories of that night rushing back. She looked at Caleb, who met her gaze with quiet reassurance. "I'll treat your wound," she whispered, pulling him aside. As Chloe wrapped his shoulder with strips of her cloak, the Alpha turned to the gathered pack, his voice rising. "Listen well," he commanded. "If a scout has found us, it means they know our location. We must prepare for an attack." He scanned the crowd, his tone resolute. "Caleb, Chloe," he said, his eyes locking onto them. "I need complete honesty. Is there anything else we should know? The survival of the pack depends on it." Caleb rose to his feet, his resolve unwavering. "Everything I've told you is true," he said. "The black werewolves want Chloe dead, and they'll destroy anyone who stands in their way. But I swear, I won't let them get near her or our home." The Alpha studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. We'll fortify the den and call a council to plan our defense. The rest of you, prepare for battle. Our survival depends on it." As the pack dispersed to carry out his orders, tension hung heavy in the air. Chloe turned to Caleb, her voice a whisper. "Do you think they'll come?" "They're already close," Caleb replied, pulling her into an embrace. "But we'll face them together." The night seemed to thicken over the den, as if the sky itself had decided to shield them from the enemy's gaze. Following the leader's words, the pack sprang into action, each member instinctively knowing their role in the defense ahead. The den's courtyard. Caleb, Chloe, and his brothers Kevin and Leo found themselves in the heart of the commotion. Pack members worked tirelessly, hauling heavy stones, retrieving weapons from hidden caches, and reinforcing their stronghold. The courtyard echoed with the rhythmic clanging of hammers on metal as additional spearheads and arrow tips were forged. "We need to block every entrance to the ravine except the main one," Kevin declared, standing by a makeshift map carved into stone. "If they attack, it'll only be from one direction. That's where we'll set the traps." "What about the main entrance?" Chloe asked, her voice steady despite the unease in her chest. "Well, turn it into a death trap," Leo replied, lifting his gaze. "Crossbows, pits with spikes, boulders ready to crush anything in their path. They won't get through. Traps and fortifications." While the older pack members focused on strategy, the younger ones dug trenches at the entrance. These were concealed with branches and snow to catch the enemy off guard. Others set up snares and traps, carefully camouflaging them among rocks and roots. "These traps are strong enough to stop even the fastest of them," said one of the wolves, tightening the mechanism of a massive snare. "But watch your step, don't fall into them yourselves." Chloe, holding a coil of rope, helped secure the traps. Caleb occasionally glanced at her, ensuring she was safe. He knew she was capable, but the instinct to protect her was hard to suppress. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as he approached her. "Yes," she replied, wiping her brow. "I just want this to be over. But I know we have to be ready." He nodded and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We are ready, and if they come, we'll fight them off." Weapons of defense. Closer to the den's main hall, several wolves tested and prepared crossbows. These ancient but reliable weapons, engraved with runes, were a testament to the strength of their ancestors. The wolves carefully drew the strings, balanced the bolts, and tested their aim. "These crossbows were crafted by our forebears," an elder explained, lifting a heavy weapon. "Each one holds a power that can bring down even the strongest of our kind." Chloe watched intently as the elder turned to her. "Would you like to try?" She nodded, accepting the weapon. Her hands trembled slightly, but she gripped the crossbow firmly. The elder pointed to a target on the wall.
"Focus.
Breathe steadily.
Now shoot."
Chloe pulled the trigger, and the bolt whizzed through the air, striking the target dead center. A cheer rose from the crowd. "You're a quick learner," the elder said with a smile. "That might just save your life." Preparing for battle. By nightfall, the fortifications were complete. The only accessible entrance to the den had been transformed into a fortress. Archers lined the walls, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Guards perched atop the tower, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The leader gathered everyone in the hall to deliver final instructions. "Listen to me," he began, standing on a raised platform. "We don't know when they'll come, but we must be ready to fight at any moment. Tonight, we're defending not just our den, but our family, our home. Remember, together we are strong." His words were met with a resounding howl of agreement. Chloe felt the unity of the pack bolstering her courage. Caleb approached her and whispered, "I'll be by your side. Always." She nodded, knowing they would face whatever came together. The first attack. The nights in the den grew more tense as the wolves worked tirelessly to prepare. Though no one knew when the attack would come, the air was heavy with anticipation. The traps were set, the crossbows primed, and every wolf stood at their post, watching and waiting. A sharp, chilling howl suddenly pierced the silence, echoing through the ravine. It was a sound both terrifying and familiar, the cry of the black wolves. "They're coming!" The lookout's shout shattered the stillness. From his perch atop the cliffs, he peered into the dark void beyond. Caleb felt his chest tighten, his heart skipping a beat. All eyes turned toward the lookout as the ominous sound grew louder. It wasn't just one or two wolves. It was a horde, their howls blending into a deafening cacophony. "Positions," the leader commanded, his voice steady but urgent. "Prepare for battle." The pack moved swiftly, taking their places. Crossbows were aimed, traps double-checked, and weapons drawn. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, huge, swift, and glowing-eyed. The black wolves moved like shadows, their forms blending with the night. Caleb gripped his crossbow tightly, his muscles coiled with tension. "Get ready," he shouted, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. He glanced at Chloe, who stood beside him, her sword gleaming in the moonlight. Her determined expression gave him strength. "They won't get through," she murmured, clutching her weapon. "We won't let them."
Fire.
The elder's command rang out, and the first volley of bolts sliced through the night. The front ranks of the black wolves fell, but the rest surged forward undeterred. The clash began in earnest, a chaotic storm of howls, snarls, and the thud of weapons meeting flesh. Chloe moved with grace and precision, her strikes landing true. Caleb fought by her side, his strength and resolve unwavering. The battle raged on, each wolf defending their home with every ounce of their strength. And as the night wore on, one thing became clear. No matter how dark the odds, the pack would stand together unyielding to protect what they held dear. With every passing moment, the battle grew more desperate. The black werewolves had broken into the den, their sheer numbers overwhelming the defenders. Everything was engulfed in fire and blood, and the air was filled with terrifying screams and roars. Chloe felt a strange sensation ripple through her body, the wind brushing against her skin, and the chaos around her seemed to ignite something deep inside. She clenched her fists, and within seconds, heat surged through her veins. The delicate balance of her control dissolved, replaced by the raw, untamed power of the werewolf within. Her eyes glowed, and she leapt into the fray. Sharp claws emerged from her hands, her movements became faster and more feral, and she attacked the black werewolves with a ferocity that tore them apart. Caleb watched Chloe fight with unmatched fury. She wasn't merely defending herself. She had become an unstoppable force of destruction, ripping through enemies with brutal precision. But pain gripped his heart as he saw his brothers faltering under the relentless assault.
Kevin.
Caleb shouted, rushing toward them, but a chilling scream froze him in his tracks. Kevin, one of his brothers, had been mortally wounded. He collapsed to the ground, his breath labored, and dark blood poured from a deep wound at his side. Caleb knelt beside him, his heart breaking. He knew Kevin's time was running out, and there was nothing he could do. "Kevin, hold on," Caleb cried, his voice trembling as he leaned over his brother. But Kevin's breathing slowed, and his eyes closed for the final time. Tears burned in Caleb's eyes, but he couldn't afford to grieve. Rising to his feet, his sorrow turned to rage. The flames of the battlefield mirrored the storm inside him. "You'll pay for this," he whispered, his voice low and filled with unrelenting anger. Darkness consumed his gaze, and nothing could stop him now. Chloe noticed him then, his eyes blazing with vengeance. He was no longer the gentle man who once held her in his arms. The doubt and hesitation were gone, replaced by a monstrous determination to avenge the fallen. She approached him, but Caleb didn't see her. He charged into the enemy ranks, his claws tearing through flesh, severing limbs and heads with terrifying efficiency. Chloe stood back, her heart breaking as she watched him transform into a relentless force of vengeance. She knew she couldn't stop him. She could only fight by his side, holding off their enemies. As Caleb tore through the black werewolves, the tide began to turn. The enemy, realizing they couldn't win against the combined fury of Caleb and Chloe, started to retreat. Chloe, still in her beastly form, fought with primal instincts guiding her every move. The battle eventually subsided, and the surviving black werewolves fled. A haunting silence fell over the den. Where chaos had raged moments before, only smoke, blood, and lifeless bodies remained. The air was heavy with grief, and the few who were still standing gathered around the fallen. The Alpha stood before the bodies of the deceased, his posture weary yet resolute. His gaze was somber, filled with pain and regret, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. Straightening his shoulders, he raised his hand, calling for silence. "We stood side by side, fighting for our family," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "Today, we lost those dearest to us. But let their sacrifice not be in vain. Let their fight be a beacon for us and the generations to come. We live because they gave their lives for us, and we must honor their memory by continuing the fight." The Alpha paused, his words echoing in the smoke-filled air. Caleb stood beside Chloe, his heart aching with sorrow. He had lost his brother, and guilt gnawed at him. He knew the war was far from over, but amidst the chaos and destruction, he had to press forward for the sake of those who remained. The Alpha continued, "But it wasn't just death that visited us today. We endured,
We survived.
and we triumphed. Ahead lies more challenges, and we must be ready for anything. This battle tested our strength and our faith in each other." His eyes landed on Chloe, and he stepped toward her, his tone growing more serious. "Chloe, your role in this family, your presence here, is no accident. You didn't come to us as just an ally. You are part of something greater. This is not merely my belief. It is written in the ancient runes, and no one can change that. You are the chosen one. Your strength and connection to us run deeper than you realize." The den fell silent. Even those who had doubted Chloe couldn't ignore the gravity of the Alpha's words. Her place in this world was now undeniably intertwined with the fate of the pack. The Alpha stopped in front of her and continued, "You've undergone your initiation. You've experienced the power of transformation, and greater challenges await you. But know this, you are not alone. You are now part of this family, and you will protect it just as we will protect you. We are one." Chloe stood there, overwhelmed. She felt the weight of his words, and while her heart raced, she couldn't find the strength to speak. Deep down, however, she knew her journey was just beginning. She was now part of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The Alpha's gaze swept over the pack, his expression resolute. And now, with the enemy driven back, we must gather our strength and move forward. We will become stronger than ever and stand until the end to protect what remains.
This is not the end.
This is only the beginning. With these words, the Alpha clenched his fist, and the others followed his lead, reigniting their resolve. This was no longer just about revenge. It was a fight for their future, for their kind, and for those who believed in them.